All right, good evening, everybody. If everyone could please find a seat and get comfortable. I want to welcome you here tonight. My name is Val Nierman, and I am the health coordinator for the Mahopac School District. I'm also a teacher at Mahopac High School. I teach health education, and I am very excited to introduce some wonderful presenters here with me tonight. We have the Prevention Council of Putnam and the Putnam CTC, headed by Marie O'Connor, Kristen O'Connell, and Bob Blazin, who are sitting up in the front, and they are responsible for this amazing mock bedroom setup that you walked through when you first came in. We will certainly share a lot more about that in a little bit. I would also like to introduce with us from Mahopac High School as well, Ms. Davia Bugay, who is our school student assistance counselor. We have Claire Pearson and Paul Maglietta. They are deputies, our school resource officers. Claire from the middle school and Paul from the high school, standing over on the side there. And we have Gary Ziegelhofer, who is one of our house principals at Mahopac High School. And we also have Dan Cohen here today. He is a pediatrician. He is a parent of children in our community. And we have a jam-packed evening for you tonight. And you know, as you look around, you kind of look around and you're like, wow, attendance is a little light. But at the same time, the people that are here are the people that are here to learn. And every single person here tonight can bring information to the people that you know and the people that you love. So we're happy to do a presentation for one parent or 100 parents. We are also being live streamed tonight. So Stash Przmilski is in the back recording. So we're on live stream. And this presentation will be posted on the web as well for people to view later on, with the exception of the Hidden Mischief bedroom walkthrough, which is, of course, stuff that we want to keep for parents to know about and see, as opposed to everybody seeing it, young people kind of having information and access to that. So the title of tonight's program, well, we have two titles. One is Hidden Mischief, which is the title that we've been using, and it has recently been changed to Hidden in Plain Sight. Other school districts have used the titles interchangeably, but I just found out tonight from Marie that the Hidden in Plain Sight is using language that maybe takes away a little bit of that stigma that we sometimes deal with when we're talking about substance use and abuse. So we were happy to change the title to Hidden in Plain Sight as well. So where do we begin? The first thing that I want to say is something that I learned at a presentation that I went to at my own son's school district's presentation last night. They have a council that is similar to the CTC down in Westchester County, and the presentation was by someone named Dr. Arya, and she is from the University of Maryland, and she was there to speak about the latest trends of teenagers and substance use and how substance use affects academic performance. Right? And when you think about, well, what matters, right? What do we really want to know about, or what do we really want for our kids? We want them to be successful in school. We know that that sets the foundation for success later on in life. And she started out the evening, and I asked her if I could quote her tonight because we were going to do this presentation, and she said, yes, of course. If you see it up here on the screen, she said, parents are the best and most available prevention strategy that we have. I can't imagine a more powerful statement, and what that says just about you being here or you watching this, live stream or on the web. So that puts a lot of power in ourselves, and I hope that tonight you walk away with more information that makes you feel even more empowered. But I want to start you off with a little bit of a journey. And you can see it says things about our childhood and teen years that we would probably not want to repeat. So I kind of want you to think about some things that may look familiar to you depending on when you were growing up, depending on the generation. So up here, I don't know if this may look familiar to any of you, Aquanet hairspray. If you were a child or teenager or young adult of the 1980s, you might remember cans of hairspray that you needed to make your hair look really big. Probably not something that you would want to repeat, but you probably thought was really great at that time. In the 80s, to work out, you needed specific clothing. I don't know why. It is not flattering. Leg warmers, but somehow we did it. And there was a time where going to Jones Beach and literally slathering your body with baby oil and iodine to attract, even more of the sun's harmful rays was just what you did to get a tan. I don't know if anyone remembers rolling around in the back of a station wagon. I don't know, if you had a station wagon in your family or your friend's parents had one, but that was fun to just kind of like be in the back and roll around. And as parents and as guardians, as people that care about kids, when you think about all of those things, you might think, wow, I can't believe it. Or, we were fine, right? We didn't have helmets. We didn't necessarily wear seatbelts. We were out there, baking in the sun with baby oil. But a lot of what we did at that time is what we did because it's kind of what we knew. And it was maybe the best that we knew at the time. And I love this quote from Maya Angelou. She says, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. So think about all of the things that we now do better for our own kids, right? So many of the things that maybe we did for ourselves, we wouldn't repeat. So, our kids are wearing helmets, and the thought of getting in a car without a seatbelt to most young people is just completely foreign. We wear whatever's comfortable to work out or to run or to exercise, and we use sunblock on cloudy days, and right? And it's just part of what we do to keep ourselves and our kids healthy, simply because we know better. So the bottom line is we have learned how to protect our kids from so many things. And as parents, we try to do our very best. It doesn't mean that our kids are always making great choices, right? They may still, get on their bike and drive off down the street without their helmet on, but you at least have the helmet for them, right? And you hope that they're using it. But I guess the question that we have for you tonight is really, what have we learned about protecting kids from the impact of substance abuse and addiction? Right? It's kind of like harm from substance abuse and addiction have been around for forever. But what do we know about it? And has there been any research that we can use to help protect our kids? The same as there has been lots of research about skin cancer and why we should use sunblock, and brain injuries and how helmets can help prevent or reduce the risk. So we know that knowledge is power, and that's why you're here tonight. When it comes to protecting our kids and teens from the impact of substance use and addiction, some recent research has given us some really excellent information, and we want to be able to share that with you. What we hope to do tonight is threefold. We hope to give you information that you can use. We hope to give you information that can kind of allow you to have conversations with your kids, allow you to identify some things that may be risk factors that you didn't know about before, and allow you to hear from some people who work with kids from a physician's perspective and from a law enforcement perspective and from an administrator's perspective as well. So where do we go from here? What is the information that we can help you with or share with you? Maybe information that you already know but kind of reinforce or remind you of, or maybe share with you some new information. The first thing that I want to share with you is that we learned something about the crosswalk. And it's not really about the Beatles kind of walking across the street, but I just like that image, and I think the crosswalk is just kind of cool. So when we think about our kids and we think about protecting them from the impact of substance abuse and addiction, if you think about the crosswalk, we know that kids are generally in three different, or could be in three different places. So where could they be? Most kids are in this place. It's called, or what you can call the safe zone. They're kids who aren't using, they're not experimenting, they're not drinking, they're not vaping, they're not smoking weed or using marijuana and edibles or any of those other forms. They're kids who are abstaining. And those are kids that we say, my kid is not engaging in this activity. And how can I keep my kid in this zone? And we know each year they get older, the more they might be exposed to substance use behaviors, maybe the more likely their friends are to be using. How can I keep my kid in the safe zone if my kid is already here? And then there's the danger zone. The other side of the crosswalk are kids that we really are nervous about. They're kids that are already experiencing consequences in school, at home. Maybe they have disconnected from friends and family. They've got those warning signs, those danger signs, where you're seeing red flags and you're worried about them, right? Because substance use may have become more important than everything else in their life. That's a place where, of course, any parent would worry. How about the kids in the middle? How about the kids who are in the crosswalk? Maybe they're drinking sometimes. Maybe they're at parties and they're doing some things. And as a parent, maybe you're thinking, well, they're okay. They're just experimenting. This is a rite of passage. Isn't this what kids do at this age? Maybe it's something that, as a parent, you remember doing when you were in high school, you're a teenager, you were a young adult. So, well, I guess we're okay, because it's not that bad, it could be worse. So if you think of kids kind of in these three different zones, what do we want to focus on, right? Well, we want to pay attention to kids in all three groups. And tonight, what we hope to do is give you information designed to help keep kids who are already abstaining, to encourage them to continue to do so, because we know that delaying their use, their first use, is so important and has such a profound impact on success later on in life. We want to give you some tools and resources for those of you who think that your kids may be in that zone where they're, again, already suffering from some serious consequences. And we also want to give you some information to think about if your kid's somewhere in the middle. As a parent, that middle zone may seem a little fuzzy. Again, we may not even all agree about how we feel about kids in that zone. So what should we know? Well, again, we want to know when our kids are experimenting, why is it that some kids may use a substance, may drink some alcohol at a party, and may never use again, and kind of try it once, put it down, never pick up again, and some kids keep on using. And for some kids, they use more and more. And for some kids, it becomes more important than things that used to be important in their lives. How do kids go from that safe zone into the crosswalk, and how do they, or why do some of them keep going? What can we do? How do we all know when our kid is in the crosswalk? What does that look like? What your parents or what our parents might have looked for back in our generation, if a teenager was experimenting, may not be the same things that we need to know about. So again, what should we know? And last but not least, how can we use this information to have conversations with our kids to get them to a place where they have tools, they have information, they have resources, and they can make healthy choices? Because at the end of the day, we know that kids are going to make their own decisions. And the best that we can do is have conversations with them and ask them some questions that may be hard to ask, but that are really important. So folks, the last piece that I'm going to share with you before I turn the microphone over to Ms. Bugay has to do with cheese. And I know it's going to sound really crazy, and you're probably thinking, please don't tell me that you brought me out on a Thursday night when there are so many other things that I could be doing to talk to me about cheese. And what does that have to do with my kid and their risk and substance use and all of these things that we worry about as parents? So if you take a look, you hopefully have a handout in front of you that has an explanation. And I want to, again, give you this information because I think it's a way to understand what we can know as parents and how we can use this information to help our kids with their decisions. So the Swiss cheese model of addiction, for those of you that haven't heard about it before, kind of looks like this. They say that every single person, and I know that I'm not presenting it the way the National Institute of Drug Abuse has designed it, and I'm using the version that I use in my health classes, which to me is like very simplistic and hopefully makes sense a little bit. So I know that the National Institute of Drug Abuse will have a more detailed explanation. But if we kind of think about it this way, and we think of every person, every kid, every teenager, every adult, is kind of like a slice of Swiss cheese. Some of us have more holes than others. And when a person has more holes, it means that we have more risk factors. We have more opportunities if we begin with that first stray, or that first vape, or that first whatever it is. There are things about us that put us more at risk. Can anyone think of something that puts a person at risk when they pick up that first substance that might put you more at risk for needing that substance more and more, for kind of being at risk for losing control over that use? Kristen? Family history, excellent, right? So we know that if in your family there is a history of any kind of substance use disorder, to anything, to alcohol, to opioids, any kind of substance, that puts a child or a teenager at greater risk as well. And it has nothing to do with how smart a person is. And I think that's a kind of like a common myth, right? My kid is too smart to do that. My kid is too smart to get addicted. And when we talk to kids, because Ms. Bouguet and I talk to kids a lot, I think that's a myth that they believe as well. Well, I'm really smart. I do really well at school. If I use this or I drink here and there, I would know when to stop. I would never let it get to that point. And what we know, of course, is that a substance use disorder isn't a choice. There's no one who wakes up one day and says, I think that I want alcohol to control my life, or I think that I want marijuana to be the most important thing in my world, more important than school, more important than my friends, more important than my family. It's something that happens, and how it happens, of course, is so complex, but it's not a choice that people make. So if a person has more risk factors, genetic predisposition, so many other things, family instability, if there is their friend group, right, is using, and their friends seem to approve, their peer group has a high approval rating of substance use, and it's something that's seen as positive, then they are simply more likely to engage in the behavior. They're also more likely to develop a problem with that behavior. On the flip side, right, the other slice of Swiss cheese has fewer holes. The fewer holes means the fewer risk factors. It doesn't mean that a child is protected. So if you're sitting here and you're like, well, there's no history of alcoholism or substance abuse in my family, then we're good, right? It's not that simple. But certainly the fewer risk factors, the less of a risk that they have. They're more likely to develop an addiction or a substance use disorder with more risks, and less likely with fewer risks. And Ms. Bouguet. So on your handout, you have this, kind of this very simplistic explanation. And on the flip side of the handout is a listing of the risk factors. As Ms. Bouguet is about to take us through those risk factors, something that you can do kind of to personalize this, right? Kind of to be thinking, well, how does this relate to me, my family, or my own son or daughter, right? Or maybe you have multiple children at home. Something you can do is, if you have like a pen or a pencil in front of you, for each of the risk factors, as Ms. Bouguet takes you through them, you could actually, on the blank slice of Swiss cheese on your handout, you can actually go through, and oh, there we go. Thank you, Ms. Bouguet. You can actually go through and draw a circle each time a risk factor applies to a particular young person that you're thinking about. And at the end of the activity, again, it gives you this idea of like where you're at. Not necessarily because you can go home tonight and change all of those risk factors, but being aware of them, having that knowledge, being able to sit down and talk to your son or daughter, again, also maybe not tonight, but it's not a one-time conversation, right? Over the course of weeks and months and years, to just keep reinforcing, like, here's what we're dealing with. And how can we, knowing these risk factors, cultivate and strengthen what we call the protective factors, which are also on that handout that Ms. Bouguet will take us through. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to Ms. Bouguet, and thank you for listening.
Thank you. Okay, so Ms. Newman mentioned about family history of addiction, so that is one of the biggest risk factors that we know about. It's not a foregone conclusion. It doesn't mean that if your parents or grandparents or aunts or uncles are struggling or have struggled with addiction, that child is destined. But it really significantly increases the risk. So it's about being aware of that. Mental health issues, behavioral issues, a tendency towards thrill-seeking or risk-taking, these are risk factors. Right? So a young person who has that tendency towards thrill-seeking, a young person, say, who has a diagnosis such as ADHD, and impulsivity is a part of that diagnosis, again, their risk is elevated. The likelihood of them getting involved is higher. When it comes to mental health concerns, right? Any person, but in particularly a young person, may be more inclined to want to feel different, to feel better. Right? That puts them at higher risk. Often, mental health concerns and substance use concerns are what we call co-occurring, right? And could that be because of what I explained, that someone is looking to treat themselves, so to speak? We hear the term self-medication, right? Or could it be that their substance use has begun to create some mental health symptoms, right? So it's a bit of a chicken or an egg question, right? But the real takeaway is that, a lot of times we think about mental health and we think about substance use disorders as adult problems, but the reality is that they are childhood issues, right? When they first emerge, the onset is in childhood. So 50% of all mental health disorders begin by the age of 14. And 75% of them begin by the age of 24, right? So the takeaway is that the earlier we are able to identify and to intervene, the better the prognosis. Ms. Neerman also mentioned about early initiation of use. That means how old were you when you first started, right? And so that, again, is one of the biggest risk factors that we know of, and it really elevates the risk. So every year that we can delay that first use is a big win, right? So the time period between the age of 12 and 17 is considered a critical risk period, right? Kind of runs counter to kind of some of the popular beliefs just that we have as a society about rite of passage or what kids do, right? It runs absolutely counter to what we know from science and medicine. So the environment. Right? Ms. Neerman was also talking about the peer group. Right? So how much kind of positive messaging about substance use is a young person exposed to? Is their peer group involved? Right? That speaks also to opportunity and availability. And beyond the peer group, just when we think again about popular culture at large, how much messaging is occurring, right? For young people, a lot of times, substance use behavior is considered acceptable or even expected, right? So that element of social pressure. And kind of the messages that come from popular culture, again, if you will, leads to something that we talk about called normalization. So the more a person is exposed to that messaging, the higher the risk. Adolescent brain development. We've learned in the pretty recent past, right? It's not something that we've known for more than a couple of decades, that the adolescent brain does not complete its development until the age of 25. So we have all these things going on with adolescent development and that idea of invincibility, and it is not that young people don't know the risks, right? What it is that the prefrontal cortex is the last part of the brain to develop, right? And so that's the part of the brain responsible for decision making and judgment and inhibitions and things of that nature, right? So young people are smart, right? Ms. Nierman said it has nothing to do with intelligence, right? It's nothing to do with not knowing the facts, but in different contexts, the processing of that risk versus reward, it's different in adolescence, right? Another thing about brain development is that the way that repeated use of substances actually changes the brain. It occurs much more easily, much more rapidly, and has long-lasting effects for someone whose brain is still developing versus someone, say, in their 30s and 40s. It's a different effect. So this list is certainly not exhaustive, but it absolutely highlights some of the very important factors, right? And some of the same things are on the handout. Some of them are different. There's certainly overlap. And so here we have the same thing, not exhaustive, but a highlight of some of the biggest protective factors. So open dialogue, especially around that family history, right? Just like we might talk about other health concerns, in the family, we need to talk about mental health and substance use concerns that may exist, right? And so that open dialogue, it's not a one and done conversation, it's something that happens over time, that's clear, that's consistent, right? And hopefully the dialogue about substance use and risk, right, is happening in other places as well, right? So it can be happening at home, it can be happening at school, it can be happening in the doctor's office, on the field with the coach, right? Other things that kids might be involved in. This conversation really is key. We talked about early identification and intervention for mental health and behavioral issues, support for trauma recovery. It's really very key. The earlier we intervene, right, we don't necessarily want to think about what we would like to think about, that it's a phase, or we don't really have to worry about things like depression or anxiety or substance abuse in adolescence, right? The sooner that we can recognize some of the warning signs or red flags and intervene, the better the prognosis. Role modeling. Okay, so alcohol, for example, right? That's a legal substance once you're of the age of 21. So if we're talking about prevention and protective factors, does that mean that alcohol should not be used within the family? Not necessarily. That's not what I'm saying. The question to think about is, what are young people witnessing? What are they seeing when it comes to celebrating and socializing and stress management? Is it always or often surrounding alcohol, right? Are they witnessing and are they exposed to other kind of ways of socializing, other strategies for dealing with the stressful and even traumatic events in life, right? It's like that old saying, don't do what I do, do what I say, right? So that's exactly backwards. And role modeling from peers and positive social activities. These are hugely important when it comes to protective factors, right? And what kind of peer groups? One of the things that I've been hearing year after year after year in working with kids is that, oh, come on, all my friends are doing it. So I'm always thinking and sometimes saying out loud, think about the groups that you're surrounding yourself with, because I know because I talk to lots of kids, not every kid, whatever, you name it, drinks, vapes. But there are lots of kids who feel like every kid does because all their friends do, right? So, of course, parents that are supportive and involved, back to that idea of conversation, and having really a network, right? And really getting some of these messages and connections within the family, within the community. Having this information about risk and protective factors, having the information that you're going to see with the interactive activity, and hear from our panel of experts, medical, administrative, law enforcement. This is information and knowledge that's going to help you in that prevention effort. And as Val said earlier, parents are, and it's shown in the research, and it's borne out time after time, that parents are the biggest factor and the most important factor when it comes to prevention. So what we're going to do next is we're actually going to, in a moment, end the live stream for those folks who are watching at home, and we're going to move into an interactive activity. So that means that the screen is going to be blank for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to come back on when we have our panel discussion. So I am going to turn it over then now to Marie and Kristen.
Okay. Marie and Kristen, thank you so much for taking us through the mock bedroom and for all of the information. I feel like we're overloading all of our guests here tonight. I feel overloaded, and I work in the field and have learned so much from you over past years, and every single time I see the presentation, I learn more. And it's, again, on some levels we think, as a parent, you know, it's worrisome, but if we flip it to the other side, what's worrisome can also be very empowering, because again, now we're leaving with more information and something that, even if you do find something that's concerning, or you're kind of like thinking about tonight and reflecting, and you're thinking, you know what, I think I really need to have a conversation with my child about this, or I think maybe I want to call a counselor or talk to somebody at school, or call Marie and Kristen's office to kind of talk about what they have shown us here tonight, then, you know, it's one step in the right direction, right? So it's, as opposed to letting a small problem turn into a big problem, it's, you know, kind of catching it now. The last part of tonight's program, and again, I'm very excited to have our guests here tonight, is we have a panel presentation, again, from Dan Cohen, our pediatrician, Gary Ziegelhofer, our house principal, and Claire Pearson, who is our middle school resource officer. We also have Paul Maglietta, our resource officer from the high school. We'd really like to invite you guys all to come up. We have three panel chairs, however it works out. And again, the goal of this piece of the presentation is to, again, share with you a perspective of three different people who all come with their own background and information, but also all work together in partnership. So we know that parents are the most effective prevention tool that we have, and we can support you in so many ways, again, through care as a physician, through support as a school resource officer, and support as a school administrator. So that's really our goal, to share with you what we do, what we have to offer, and how you can help to support your pediatrician, your school, your resource officer, with the conversations that you have at home and the things that you do with your children at home. So I'm going to start with Dr. Cohen. Dr. Cohen, if you don't mind, again, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you so that everyone can hear, and the people that are watching this live stream can hear as well. Dr. Cohen, would you start us off with sharing what you're seeing as a pediatrician, what you're seeing in the office, what are kids and teens talking to you about, and what are, if you had, 10 minutes to give parents the most important pieces of information, what would you share tonight?
Thank you, and good evening. So, as you said, my name's Dan Cohen. I'm a parent in the area. I grew up around here in Putnam Valley. I'm a pediatrician down at Westmed, down in Purchase. I've been doing this for about 25 years, and it was about 8 years ago where all this started. And I'll start off with what I saw in my office. So I have like 3 anecdotes that really came up. The first one was, I had a parent call me. It was about 1 in the morning. It was the night I was on call. And the first words out of her mouth when I picked up the phone, I say, "Hi, it's Dr. Cohen, how can I help you?" And she goes, "Can I let him vape one more time?" And whenever I say that, everyone kind of gets this pause. They're like, what parent would ever ask that? And I go, "Well, what's going on?" And what happened was, she walked into her child's room and found that. She found the hidden mischief. She found the stuff in plain sight. It was about 3 days ago, and took it. And this kid, who was an honors student, athlete, jock, was sitting on his bed crying and shaking And he had been throwing up all night, not because he was so upset that he had been discovered, because he was in floored withdrawal. And he had been using Juul for about 3 months, and that was it. And he was shaking, and the mother didn't know what to do because he was crying in such distress. She was like, "Can I do it one more time?" And the truth of that was there really isn't that much information on nicotine withdrawal for teens. And this was 1 o'clock in the morning. And I said, "Well, I've never heard of someone dying of nicotine addiction." She goes, "So I can let him suffer?" And I said, "I guess." She said, "Thank you," and hung up the phone. The next thing that happened was a few days later, I had this story. I was talking with a group of parents, and they talked about how there was a group of girls in their basement, and one of the parents walked downstairs, and the girl dove for a phone charger on the wall. I was like, "Why are you diving for a phone charger?" Later that day, they found a Juul pod in the house. And that phone charger was just what it was. It was one of the bricks that you put into the wall to plug your Apple phone charger in, but it was where you plugged in your Juul that they were using downstairs. The final story is one that people talked about EVALI before. And EVALI is e-cigarette or vaping use associated lung injury, which is a phenomenon in the last 2 years. And I'll get into more of that as we go on after we let everybody else talk. But I have a patient that it was about 2.5 years ago. He's a 16-year-old, really healthy guy. And we didn't know at the time, his mom, and he just told me this past year, had just vaped with a marijuana cart, they call it. So just a cartridge of marijuana. And a day later, he started coughing, having severe chest pain. He went to the emergency room, and he told me in his own words, he's like, "I remember I was having a difficult time breathing. I was sitting on the table. I had to get up to pee. And the next thing I remembered was 7 days later." And he was hospitalized for 6 weeks. And I saw the x-rays. It was the worst pneumonia I've ever seen. And this wasn't a kid who was doing it over and over and over again. This was about his 4th or 5th exposure to marijuana vaping. And with those 3 stories, it was around the time that I really realized, and the last one was later, but around the time of those other anecdotes, I realized how little we knew. And I took it upon myself to do kind of the who, what, where, when, why, and how of vaping to kind of figure out what was going on. So I started asking more of the kids, and the things that I would pick up, and I'll try to keep this short. When it comes to who's vaping, and we all have an image of our head of who would be using marijuana, who would be using e-cigarettes or vape or Juul. And we think back to high school when we were there, and it was the kids in a leather jacket, some guy in a hood in the corner, it was this. And I will tell you at the time, it's everybody. Don't look for the person you think it's going to be. It was all of them. And the reason it was all of them is if you put yourself in their position at the time, someone walks up to you, a friend, someone you care about, someone who would never want to hurt you, go, "By the way, I just read that this is 95% safer than cigarettes. This one tastes like mint. I have blueberry at home, I have mango, and everybody loves mango. And it also makes me feel really good. It kind of chills me out, and it's not even smoke. No one knows." And they do it in front of you, they hand it to another friend who does it, and then they give it to you. Why wouldn't you do that? "Oh, by the way, my dad uses it to quit smoking." Again, why wouldn't you do that? And if you're one of the people that were discussed before, one of those kids who has anxiety, who has ADD, or for heaven's sake, was just in 8th grade, that's a tough time. Nicotine is an amazing substance. It is one of the only known substances we have that is not only calming, but not sedating. Think about all the medicines people take, narcotics, all these other kind of drugs that calm you, Valium, whatever it is, they knock you out. Nicotine manages to calm you down, and you still feel up. And actually, teenagers get locomotor agitation. They actually get more active on it. So they feel relaxed, but they can do whatever they want. That is the gateway to addiction right there. And nicotine is one of the most addicting substances known to man. And acutely, it does something in your brain which raises dopamine, which is the pleasure chemical in your brain, but then it drops off. What a better way to get addicted, because once it comes up and comes down, you want that. You don't feel good the way you are, so you just do it again and again and again, and then you're that 16-year-old sitting on the bed shaking and vomiting. So I started talking to parents and teens, and normally when a pediatrician talks to a teenager, we talk by themselves for confidentiality reasons. But I started talking to them in the room with the parent first and asking them to tell me what they knew about vaping. Explain it to me like I'm a second grader, like what it was. And this was about 4 or 5 years ago. And about 4 or 5 years ago, when they started telling that story, you'd see the mother's face drop, or father in that case, because they didn't even know how to spell Juul yet. Because Juul wasn't on TV. It wasn't even on the radio until it got bought out by a big cigarette company. It went through the internet. It went through YouTube. It went through all the social media places. So the only people that knew about it were the kids. And the parents start hearing this and they get scared. Just like I saw everyone's face when they're walking through that room up there. We're all like, oh my God, I don't know any of this. And what happens when parents get scared? We yell and scream, which makes our kids more scared. And they already feel anxious and they feel pushed away. And what do you do when you do that? You go to your room, you shut the door, and you try to calm yourself down. Oh, and guess how they did that? And that was happening over and over and over and over again. So in my practice, I started taking it on myself to start talking to kids earlier and earlier and earlier. Because if you ever ask yourself, go up to a kid in kindergarten and ask them about cigarettes. They all know. They all know they're bad. So why don't they know vaping's bad yet? Why don't they know marijuana can damage your brain? And the answer is because we're afraid to talk to them. So if you start talking to a kid at a younger age and bring it up and give them the real information, things like popcorn lung and vapes that blow up in your face, don't do that. Those are one-time stories. A kid will never see it. But they will see their friend have a panic attack. They will see their friend get hospitalized for vomiting, and they will see their kid, their friend be stuck over and over and over again looking for a Juul, leaving class to do that stuff. The truth works. And I've actually seen in my practice, not because of anything I did, I think this is more kids getting smart. I think nicotine vaping is on the decline. I don't mean it's going anywhere, it's nicotine. That's really hard to get rid of. But before I pass it on about educating everybody else, the marijuana part of this, believe it. It's not just because it's going to be legal in about 37 minutes. It's because, think about the last time you heard anything bad about marijuana. When was the last time it was presented as anything else, as some happy drug that makes people love brownies? And I can tell you that I've seen 9 kids in my practice who will never be the same, because sometimes it can open up the wrong path. And I can get into that if people have more questions later. And I've seen real psychosis from marijuana because that brain is not ready yet. The gray matter of your brain changes over that period of time, and it's almost like you went into a room that had 10 separate doors and you had to figure out the way out. As your brain is developing, you start putting little marks on the door, and when you're an adult, there's only 2 doors left, so it's easier to get out. Marijuana takes the pen out of your hand and confuses everything, and that's why these kids end up having even more anxiety and more depression. But at the time, they felt great. Those brownies smelled really good. And they see all their friends okay, except for that psychotic kid that I lost, who doesn't go back to the party that they never know about until they're in second year of college and one of their friends from high school dies. It's important to really talk about this stuff out and be aware of it and not be scared. And the final thing before I'll pass the mic is, what do you do when you walk into that room and you find this stuff? How do you then talk to your children about that? Like I said, my first impulse 4 or 5 years ago, I would have been yelling too. I'm like, if this had been one of my kids, I've been talking to you since you were 3. How could you? But that's the exact wrong thing to do, because as we said before when I presented that scenario, how could they not? So what you do at a time like that is try to be empathic. Try to not ask them why. Tell them about a story that you had. Tell them why you're scared. Tell them why you're concerned. Ask them what they get from it. What's the benefit? Because for a lot of times, they're going to tell you the truth. It just makes me feel better. I can relax beforehand. But what I always ask them is, if you need that to relax, What are you going to do when things get worse? And then go into your family. They brought up the genetics. There's things called genetics and epigenetics. Addiction is genetic. There is no debate about it. Again, it doesn't mean that you're locked into it. I have 2 taller brothers. Just because I'm short and my parents are short doesn't mean it's going to happen. But genetics are a very potent thing. Chemicals work in different systems. Epigenetics are the fact that that genetic code has redundancies in it. It has code that isn't always used. But if your environment changes, you turn on switches. And some of those switches don't get turned off. Nicotine is an amazing force on epigenetics. You could have things that are turned on, and then you are more addictive to things like cocaine, to alcohol. It's one of the few drugs that does that. It doesn't go back the other way. So it's really important to let them know why you're afraid and then engage any support you can around them to do that and start talking at an early age. Like I said, education is absolutely positively the key because we don't have tools yet of how to break the addiction or withdrawal of nicotine. So speaking of education, I will pass the mic on to Mr. Ziegelhofer, and if there's questions later, I'll be happy to stay.
So thank you for coming out tonight. Mr. Ziegelhofer, one of the assistant principals at the high school. And really I want to touch on the way the school is impacted, discipline that comes out of it, and how students on a daily basis are dealing with this. So I'm going to first step off with saying that there are 2 lines we have to draw in all this. There is the vaping of an e-cigarette type device, and then there's a THC, CBD, whether gummy or device that kids bring to school, and they're dealt with very differently. So I'm going to start off by just talking about the vaping device that is literally a cigarette of the modern trend, right? When we talked before and we were seeing what's up there, I actually am not seeing much of what's up there right now in the building. I'm starting to see more of what we call single-use, disposable e-cigarettes. They are not chargeable. They're sold in very great flavors like mango and grape and cherry and strawberry, and you find banana strawberry, and flavors that you would sit there and say sound like candy flavors, right? So they're being sold in these boxes that are bright colored, and they literally are candy flavored, and they're buying them online, having them shipped directly to the house, where you as parents may already have to set them up with a credit card or a device that they can do that, and you may not keep good control over it, an eye on it, and then one kid buys for 4 or 5 friends, and now the devices are being passed out, right? They'll come to school and they'll have it hidden in a pocket in their book bag or in their pants pocket, right? It's very simple, it's small, it's easy. And they'll go to a secluded stairwell and or a bathroom and puff it a few times. And it's not a lot. They're not sitting there like an old cigarette where it takes a few minutes to get the cigarette lit, to then get it started, to then sit there and sort of get the ashes off. It's a very quick, instantaneous thing. And then they'll walk into class and life will go on as normal, right? So for that type of activity in our building, the first offense is a day of in school. And I'm going to the discipline side because I want you to understand how we're dealing with it. And that day of in school is in our building where teachers and educators are still there with them, but in particular where staff members, clinical and social workers, psychologists are all there. And Ms. Bouguet, who works with our student assistance counselor in particular, has set up a questionnaire that the kids fill out, a Google form that they fill out that gives them a little information about what those devices are, what they're doing to their body, a little knowledge base about how it's affecting them and their development, right? And we ask the kids to do this as they're sitting there in ISS, also doing schoolwork. And we also ask Ms. Bouguet or one of the clinical staff members to try to meet with the student, to do a little discussion about what decision makings they're making and get a little more understanding of why they may have made that decision, right? Because that's a key point that the doctor just pointed out and that I want you to start to think about why or what is drawing a child to do this. Because even when I work with students and I'm dealing with them at that moment, they may cry in my office, they may promise, they'll give me every answer you ever imagine. And when I pick up the phone, I sometimes call the parent. Half the parents are sitting there saying to me, I know, an older brother or a sibling that's, at college or a friend that they hang with that they've always had that question. And other half the parents have no clue. They're shocked that kid's in my office as the kid is himself because they never thought they'd get caught, right? But that first line of discipline is a day of in school. It seems harmless, but it still teaches a lesson and it gets the kid to start to think about why they're doing that. But for many kids, I hate to say, we're seeing them come a second or third time. And that's when the discipline starts to ramp up to a day out of school, 2 days out of school, 4 days out of school. And we call it progressive, right? It's one thing to make a bad decision. It's another thing to double down and triple down and quadruple down. And what happens is kids at that point get into panic mode. And they already know I called you, so they start lying their way through. They start blaming friends, and they start doubling down on the discipline because now they include others that were not even a part of it. And the bad decision making starts to happen. And that's the kid I really get worried about. And why I say that is that kid now is showing us that they have a propensity towards making bad decisions because of this device. And that's the kid that I would say that right away we have to start to really set up with our clinical staff to start to really talk about more about what's going on in their lives and why that decision's being made, right? But if we step away from that and say those students are what I mostly see right now. That's what I mostly see, kids making bad decisions with vaping devices that are jewel-based and or single-use. The other thing we're starting to see more of, and in the last 3 years in particular, because the states of California and Colorado started this trend of legalizing the marijuana, the CBD, and the THC products. I'm starting to see, and they literally, I have a box in my book bag I brought that literally says state of California. I have another one that says state of Colorado, right? So the states legalized it. So they're legally distributed devices from those states. But here, a kid in the state of New York, in Mayapack High School, has brought it into our building. And these are not and as the doctor just said, not the single old school little bit of weed. This is 90% pure THC. And we have to understand it's not just the THC, it's the chemicals they're using to distill that oil out of the plants. So they're using high-end chemicals that are also poisonous themselves. And on both boxes, it says the same thing, can be cancer-causing, or has shown to be cancer-causing. Not from maybe the actual THC, but from the chemicals they're using to draw it out, right? So that student now ends up in my office, smoked, maybe under the influence, someone noticed it, I now get brought into the situation, we bring them to the nurse, we get them checked, safety check is what we call, we're checking their book bag, we're doing all the things to make sure there's no other devices. They have just that single use, pen we'll call it, that the kids call them, right? Mod pens. And at that point now, that kid is looking at 5 days suspension and a soup hearing. And a soup hearing is when the district says this is a crime or activity that is so egregious that the superintendent of schools can extend the suspension. And that child now, usually minimum is 30 to 45 days for first offense, on top of the 5 days they already got. So you're talking 35 to 50 days out of school. Now think about that to a kid's education. We're not sitting here saying, rah, rah, let's do this, but we have to have a clear line. There's a reason why you drive around schools and there's signs that say drug-free school zones. The federal government, the state of New York, every local municipality has said to us that this is what we want in our schools. But yet, we're now legalizing these things at such a pace, and even the state of New York, as the governor said, would be a great add-on to our financial situation, right? Not how's it going to affect young people or what's good for the best of our communities. It's a financial question, is now being thrown in our face as possibly happening in any minute now, right? So, and what is that going to do to the feeling kids have? Because it will still be illegal on a school campus. It will still be illegal on the school grounds. And I'm gonna pass on in a few minutes to my colleagues in the police department, because at this point, I didn't add on, when I find that on them, and I have tests in my office that I have to use to show that it's THC based or CBD based, I'm now bringing a police officer into my room and letting them know that I have a drug on campus, and it's not treated as a simple little bag of weed. These kids are now going to possibly be issued an appearance ticket, or potentially, if they have enough, handcuffed and taken out of our building. And think about the trauma that kid is about to go through, not even realizing it when they went online and purchased something that seemed so innocuous and so like, oh, okay, it's going to make you feel better, because they're exploring the world around them and seeing what's easily found on the internet these days. I mean, it's really an interesting dynamic that we're facing, right? So I say that to you because That's the way it's happening right now. Kids on social media, internet, amongst friends are learning about these things and then are taking those opportunities to try them. And we as parents aren't really up to how fast it's moving and how strong it is. And now we're being put in these situations where our children are being suspended or removed from school for long periods of time because they made bad decisions. I ask every parent, if you really want to find out what's going on, you don't even have to go to the bedroom. Open up your child's book bag. Really open up a book bag and look at it. Because there's very little in a book bag these days. There's a Chromebook or electronic device that they're learning off of. There's maybe one textbook. There's about 4 or 5 notebooks, a few folders, and that's it. But if you get into all the 5,000 little pockets, you will find a lot about your kids out. And I really mean that. You'll find if your kid has been jeweling, a little green or purple or yellow jewel cap. If your child's invested in anything weed-based, you'll find little weed-type drawings or little pieces of paper that refer back to buying something, or boxes or plastic containers that talk about it. Because these are the things I'm finding when I check a kid's book bag often, right? And when I bring those things to a parent, I show them what I got out of a book bag, right? Not even from the child themselves, not emptying a pocket, nothing, just from the book bag. Sometimes parents are blown away because they had no clue. And when I say, well, have you checked the book bag recently? They'll say, I haven't touched that thing since 7th grade. It's the same book bag he's had since 8th grade. It's the new one I bought in 9th grade, and he's a junior now, and I haven't had to touch it. Well, in there has been their life in our building, and there's been their life around school, and there's been their life, period. And you can find a lot out by just looking at it. And that piece in itself, I ask parents, if you find out there's something there, talking to the kid is one piece, but also finding resources within the school district that can help is a big piece. Every kid's got a counselor. Every counselor is connected to a social worker and a psychologist. And all those people are here to help our students on a daily basis. Sometimes we're afraid to let school officials and people know that there's maybe something going on because we're afraid of a stigma. But we're dealing with it on a daily basis, whether it's a stigma or not. We know it's happening. And to let us be able to maybe be a sounding board or a better way of talking to your child or bringing it into a group setting where your kid might be able to meet with other kids who've had the same problem may be a greater sounding board than what we said before, and I agree with, the yelling and screaming that sometimes happens when our frustration gets up and we are so disappointed in something we never saw happening in our houses, but there it is in front of us, right? We are a key resource. I'm never going to discipline. I don't yell in my office. My deputy here has been in my office a million times when I'm dealing with bad situations. I do not yell because I find that once you yell, kids shut down and they don't want to talk. I try to talk to a kid. I try to get them to understand by letting me know the truth. That helps me in the end. Discipline is going to come no matter they like it or not, and I tell them I'm going to do everything I can to represent them in the right light. But the reality is that they made a bad decision, and let's go from here forward on how to do it better or plan better. And kids sometimes buy into that. Not every kid does. But if I can get even half the kids to think that way, I'm hopefully helping the process. And then I set them up with the right people in my building to help oversee and be a resource. That's the next step, right? And that's what we do. But remember the discipline that comes, if you as a parent take that as a moment to really sit with your child when they're maybe at home or you're getting that message to say, where am I at and what can I do? That's more important than the yelling and screaming. And I really mean that, all right? And I say that anytime that bad thing comes to your house that you're not expecting, we are a resource. Please feel free, any of our clinical staff, to let them know, and we can help. We're not going to sit there and use it against your child. We're going to use it to help your child, all right? I'm going to pass it on to one of the officers right now so that they can talk a little bit about the legal side beyond our doors when something comes down and you have to deal with it.
Good evening. I'm Deputy Pearson, school resource officer at the middle school here in Mahopac. I've been with the Sheriff's Department for 13 years, 10 of which have been spent working as a school resource officer in the schools. So I've seen the evolution of what can go on with the kids over the years. I was in high school and I've been with middle school students for a number of years now. The very nature of our title, Deputy Maglietta and I, we are school resource officers. Okay, so we're a resource for not only the administrators in the school building, but the teachers, the parents, everybody, you guys, your kids, we are a resource for you. We're part of the school community. Yes, we are police officers within your community, but we're there to keep your school safe. And part of that safety aspect is working with your kids to make sure that the decisions that they're making and the things that they're doing in their life, and the kids they're hanging out with, things like that, are good ones, and things that are going to sustain them through their life. Are just like the goal of all the administrators and teachers. We're there to help make sure the kids succeed through their whole school experience and on the rest of their life. Just a couple of years ago, 3-4 years ago, is when I started noticing the juuling, the vaping, and it turned out that a monitor in my school just kept saying to me one day, at a different school that I worked at, "It smells like a bakery in this hallway every day. I don't know what's going on. These girls keep spraying perfume. It smells like vanilla down here all the time." And I passed it off as the kids are coming out of gym class, they're in the locker rooms, and they're just spraying body spray on them and everything else. But we started noticing it more and more around the bathrooms, which turned into more of an investigation, and suddenly it dawned on us that we had this issue going on in the bathrooms. And like the doctor was saying, we ended up with a couple of students, middle school age students, who were going through the withdrawal process, and it was so sad to watch. You have young girls and boys who, kids are naturally hyperactive in middle school as it is, but when you suddenly have a child that is unable to sit still and is in your face, in the teacher's face, zooming around the classroom, you wonder, is it something going on with ADHD, or is there something more going on? And I did have to deal with a couple of students who were going through the withdrawal process. So the education aspect, something that Paul and I do, we're teachers also in the schools, and we go into the health classes, the history classes, English classes, whatever classes we can get in. It doesn't even necessarily have to be law enforcement related, to get in and talk to the kids about real life stuff and to teach them ways to stay safe. The vaping aspect, when I do it with the kids in the classroom, I always go back to, you brought up kindergarten and the cigarettes. All the kindergartners know cigarettes are bad. The other thing I bring up with them is when they learn fire prevention and they're taught stop, drop, and roll. I said, remember when you guys were taught the firemen came in, and everybody loves the firemen and their trucks and everything, and they teach you what to do if there's a fire in your house, and what do you do when there's smoke in your house? And all the kids, no matter how old they are, 8th graders, 6th graders, stop, drop, and roll. Great. So you learned to drop to the bottom where the air is clear and there's no smoke, so that you can breathe, to help you survive and get out of your house, right? Yes. Okay, so let me ask you this. Why would you then stick something in your mouth that you're going to suck into your lungs and inhale into your lungs, that is a vaping device or a cigarette that puts something into your lungs? If you want to save your life in a house fire, why would you then intentionally put something in your mouth that's going to essentially cause that house fire effect in your lungs? And the kids kind of look at you for a second, like, oh. Yeah, and we go through the chemical process of other chemicals that are in foods and things like this. Would you put this on your food? Would you eat this? No. Well, that's the chemicals that are in the vape pens and the Juul pods and things like that. And a lot of this stuff is unregulated, and it's coming from overseas where they don't have the regulations that we have, and you really don't know what is in the chemicals that you're inhaling. And like Dr. Ziegler, is it doctor or Mr.? Mr. I'll upgrade you, Mr. Ziegler. Congratulations, you got a promotion. If we end up being brought into this aspect, again, we're trying to help prevent this by educating the students and being in the classrooms with the kids and teaching them how to avoid this stuff. But if we do end up being part of the process, there's a legal process as part of this as well. They can be charged criminally. Juveniles can be charged criminally with criminal possession of a controlled substance for THC. All right, so just because kids hear that they're under the age of 18, they're considered juveniles, they think they can't be charged criminally. They absolutely can. And a lot of times, like you said, it's an appearance ticket for family court. There can also be a criminal court aspect to this, depending on how much they are possessing it and whether they're selling it to students, and that aspect. The number one question I get from parents is, how are my kids getting this stuff? They're not old enough to walk into a store and get this stuff. How are they getting it? One of the things I noticed again a couple of years ago is, even with my own nieces and nephews, they all started asking for gift cards for holidays, for birthdays. No kids wanted gifts anymore. They all started asking for Amazon gift cards. And everybody said, oh, that's fantastic. I don't have to worry about buying them something they don't like. It's so easy, they're asking for the gift cards. Well, they're using those Amazon gift cards to then go on to Amazon and purchase these items and have them sent directly to their house. I don't know how many of you guys go through the packages that come to your house, but I would. They're still living under your roof. I remember my parents in the old days, you're living under my roof, you're living under my rules, I need to know what's going on in your life. They knew who my friends were, they knew the parents. If a package comes to the house, open it up, see what's in there. If they're spending money, if they're using your credit card, remember some of this stuff, depending on what they're ordering, could be traced back to you potentially. Take a look at what they're doing. And my only other advice would be to Google is your friend. If you're afraid to, you think it's overwhelming, there's too much information, you're never going to know what's going on. It's the same thing with social media. When I have a lot of discussions with parents about social media, it's ever changing, it moves so fast, and parents are afraid of that, and they're afraid to that their kids are smarter than them when it comes to this stuff. Google's your friend. Go online, just start literally putting in what are the teenagers into these days, ? And it'll bring up a whole bunch of stuff, and it'll start telling you. If you put in what social media apps are kids into these days, it'll bring up tons of websites that you can go to that will educate you on how to use Snapchat, how to use all the other things they're into, House Party and all these other apps. Same thing is on there with the THC and the CBD and all the Juul pods and everything else. Go on there and start researching it. Don't be afraid to look into it. Don't be afraid to start reading this stuff. And don't be afraid to have the discussions with your kids. Like you were saying, the kids will shut down. The minute you start yelling or the minute you start saying, when I was a kid, they don't want to hear, we're old. Doesn't matter how old you are, how young you are, we're old in their eyes, okay? Anything we say to try and give them an experience, they're going to be like, yeah, okay, whatever. Be honest with them, be calm, and if you honestly ask them, hey, so what's this thing called the Juul pod, or what's this app everybody's using? They'll tell you. They'll take out their phones and they will show you how to use it, and they will go through the whole process of TikTok. How many of your kids use TikTok? Same thing. Hey, what's this thing TikTok? How do you use that? They will take out the phones and they'll show you. It's a sharing experience you guys can have. We don't necessarily like to arrest children, even though we're in the schools and that's one of our roles, and we are, as I say to the kids, real police officers. Just because we work in the schools doesn't mean we're not real police officers. We are. It's not something that we enjoy, but if it comes down to it, unfortunately, there may come a time where we're going to be sitting with you in the principal's office and telling you as a parent that unfortunately we are arresting your child for criminal possession, criminal sale. And it's a scary process for any child to go through. It's a scary process for you guys to go through, and it sets you up with probation in the county and the whole court system. So hopefully before it gets to that point, with the administrators and everything that's going on in the schools and the great job the schools are doing and what we're trying to do with education and health classes and things like this, hopefully it doesn't get to the point where we are handing you an appearance ticket and saying you have a court date or you have a date with probation at this specific date and time, and they need to see you and your child. And they will start digging through your life and asking a ton of questions about you and your child and their school record and everything. So it's an invasive process, not only just for your child, but for you as parents as well. So it's almost like you guys got arrested as well. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add. Does anybody have any questions for the doctor or any of us up here?
Something I didn't highlight before, but many a times when I'm dealing through the process with parents, they want to know where the rules are that govern how kids are punished. And in the high school, the first day of school, we have something called special homeroom. It's like a 30-minute period where we meet with the kids and just go over some basic school needs and rules. And the code of conduct, which is updated yearly, is provided to your children electronically. The code of conduct is also on the district website and the high school website. So it's this document that the district has to keep in play, and it's updated yearly by the board adopting it, right? And it is really the rules that govern how discipline and school things go on. Parents sometimes never even look at that. And I say that you should at some point take a peruse through it and look at it, because if discipline does come, it helps outline why discipline's coming and how it's going to be dealt, right? Mr. DiCarlo, our superintendent of schools, at the beginning of every school year, the last two, has come into the high school and met with every grade, all right? Every grade. He takes the time to come in and speak for a period with the grade about things that we're seeing, like juuling and THC and all these things that are becoming more common, and talk about how the school is going to address those issues if the student's caught with it. And the reason we do that is because we know that there's going to be a number of students that may be involved in this, and we want to warn them ahead of time about not bringing that to school or not bringing that into our environment, and that the consequences will be swift and quick, but yet we still also want them to know the resources in our building that are available. And then through the health department, meaning our health classes, and through staff members, clinical and social workers, psychologists, counselors, all speak to students on a daily basis about issues like this. But also I want to say that through some of our curriculum that we're now writing, like the MHS Life course that all ninth graders are a part of, they're being taught more about this in that. And some of our clinical staff and our health people are going into those classes prior to them maybe sitting in health itself to talk about these things and make the kids more aware earlier. And I think that's the key that the doctor and I feel are probably the most in sync with on every way, shape, and form. Prevention comes from knowledge. And I always tell parents 90% of that knowledge happens in the house. We'd like to say the school is doing it, but kids are at school, they're usually focused on a subject or a topic or an event, right? When we come with this other knowledge, they listen. They'll listen. But the learning they learn is truly in the household with the way we interact with them, what we say, and the cues we give. If we never talk about juuling or vaping or any of those things, they're not going to think of it as a big deal because their friends are doing it. But if we tell them, just like the cigarette campaigns of the 90s and the 80s where you were told it's bad, 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 and parents would say it's bad, and parents would stop smoking because they knew it was bad, if we say those things and represent that to them on a daily basis or ask them about it and make them think about it for a second, every study shows that that will be the most impactful thing to your child over time.
Thank you. I'm just keeping mindful of the time, and I know that our program is set to end at 9 p.m. And I'm hoping that our panelists will be able to stay for a few minutes if anyone has a question, or any of our presenters tonight, if anyone has a question that would like to stay and ask them, we certainly welcome you to come on up. But Mr. Ziegelhofer, what you were just saying resonates with me so much. As a health teacher, my primary goal is prevention. And I think what's so fascinating about prevention is, like, on one hand, right, when we can prevent a child from developing any issue, any health, whether it's an eating disorder, a substance abuse disorder, if we can prevent them from developing, problems related to, like, reproductive health, sexuality, right? That's what health class is all about. Then it's a win, because we know that the cost of treating an issue in terms of our health and in terms of our money and our time and our emotions is so tremendous. There's a statistic, well, two powerful statistics that, again, I just kind of want to close with because of what you're just saying. One is the research shows, all of the prevention research shows, that kids whose parents talk to them regularly about substance use and abuse, about family history, or about our values as a family, regardless of what you did or thought when you were younger, right? Based on what we now know can be helpful for kids. Kids whose parents who have those conversations are 42% less likely to develop a substance abuse disorder, but only 25% of parents have those conversations with kids. So just think about that one piece of information, and that, you know, you're here tonight, and maybe the next step is that you're having that conversation. If you never did before, maybe you have that conversation this weekend. And if you've been having those conversations, that you're reminded that what you're doing is so powerful, and to continue to keep doing them. The second thing, when we think of, like, the dollar amounts, right? There's some statistic that says for every dollar we invest in prevention, across the board, preventing obesity, preventing diabetes, preventing everything, we save something like $5.40 just as a country for every dollar we invest. For every dollar that we invest in preventing problems associated with substance abuse, whether it's accidents, injury, and substance abuse disorders, for every dollar we save 14. Just think, if that was a stock, and you could invest your money in that kind of a stock with that kind of return, we'd all drop everything tonight and invest every penny in it. So I, as I was listening to Officer Pearson speaking, and I'm envisioning, like, myself as a parent sitting in the principal's office explaining how my child might be arrested for what they're doing. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like this is awful. And then I flip back to why we're here, right? Because at the very beginning of the night, we said, this is about empowering you with information. This is about prevention. So it's 1 less or 10 less or 100 fewer kids that ever end up in that seat because of conversations that we're having and all of the work, the hard work that you're doing at home that we are hoping to reinforce at school. So folks, thank you so much for being here. For anyone watching at home, thank you for watching. And please, again, thank you, Mr. Ziegelhofer, for stressing, reach out to any of us, our prevention council partners, your pediatrician. We have new resources here tonight from other resources that we didn't even know existed in the community. So thank you again, and our administrative team that is represented here with Dr. Stoll and Dr. DiCarlo, all doctors. Thank you guys for supporting events like this, and thank you again to all of our presenters tonight for being here for us. And thank you.